All right, so hi again and welcome. Like I said, I'm Dr. Kristin Jordan and I teach in sociology and I'm a data scientist in the Office of Institutional Research. And that Office of Institutional Research here at Channel Islands, as well as most of the offices of institutional research at all of the CSUs, use Tableau as their main tool for aggregating, studying, analyzing, and visualizing data about our students. So that's what an Office of Institutional Research does. If you go to the Canvas course, or if you just Google CFUCI Institutional Research, you'll be taken to a page and you can actually look at a bunch of public-facing dashboards that will show you how we use Tableau here at CI to visualize enrollment, retention, graduation, even things like postgraduate outcomes once you graduate, where students go on to graduate school and so on. So Tableau is a really versatile tool, like I said, that gets used a lot in higher education, but it also gets used across all sorts of industries. When I go to Tableau conferences, there are big hospitals there who use Tableau. Big companies like Coca-Cola and others. Sorry, are you recording it? Yeah, I said okay. Well, now I'm afraid I'm going to double check. We're recording. So if you're, I know some of you are here to kind of learn Tableau, but we're hoping that many of you are here. Now this is not going to hurt. We're hoping that many of you are here to participate in the Plot-A-Thon. And registration for the Plot-A-Thon is now open. It's an event towards the end of February, and it's a chance to put your data visualization skills and data storytelling skills to the test using Excel, Tableau, R, or Python. And there are prizes. Cash and or gift certificate, I'm not sure prizes, but like huge dollar amount prizes, a couple $100 here or there, right, Colin?
I believe so.
Okay. So way better prizes than I've ever seen at any other events. So you can use this QR code or the link to take you to the WMC events page, and it has a registration button to get you started and registered for Plot-A-Thon. So today's plan, we're going to spend a little bit of time getting familiar with our data. I have a kind of small sample data set of some Spotify data that we'll be playing around with and visualizing and analyzing it a little bit. The data that I have for you is already clean. Yay. I'm going to show you how to do a few things in Tableau in terms of kind of data prep and data cleaning. But when you're participating in the Plot-A-Thon or when you're working with data of your own, it's important to clean your data before you analyze your data. And so as part of these lunch and learn workshops and also as part of the Plot-A-Thon Canvas course, there's a great section on data cleaning that actually Dan, who's joining us virtually, put together. Right? So if data cleaning is something you're not familiar with or comfortable with, make sure that you're going through those steps too. There's no point in analyzing data if it's bad data. Then we're going to talk about what descriptive statistics and data visualizations are. And then we're going to get started in Tableau. We're going to connect our data, go over some key terms and features. And then most importantly, and what I'm hoping we're able to spend the most time on today, is actually going to be exploring and visualizing the data. So let's talk about our Spotify data set. Anytime you're looking at data, again, the first step is going to be to kind of get aware of what's in the data, clean that data, review that data. But again, I very kindly cleaned some data for you already. So let's take a look at that data. And if you haven't already, you can download the data at one of these kind of mini links as well. So this is the selection of Spotify data from songs that were released between January and June 2020. So a very interesting time period. And this again is just a selection, but I want to take us through kind of what we have here. So we have 40 rows because our first row is a header, right? We have an ID number, the highest charting position. So, you know, did they chart #1 or not? And apparently you can go all the way into the hundreds in terms of charting. The number of times they charted, song name, number of streams on Spotify, the artists or combinations of artists, which becomes an interesting problem that we'll talk about in a little bit. The number of followers the artist has. This is what is supposed to be a unique song ID, but when we start exploring the data, we're going to find out that it's actually duplicated once in the case of a song that has been remixed. Both the original song and the remix use the same song ID. This is a very broad genre. Certainly all of these songs could and do fit multiple genres, but this is kind of the broad kind of first category of genre for the song itself. Release date, a score of popularity. This goes from 0 to 100. But most people are in the like 70s, 80s, 90s. Then there are all these very interesting danceability, energy, loudness, speechiness, acousticness, liveness, and tempo. That these are all measures, well, except for tempo, just kidding, tempo is something else, but danceability through liveness are all measures of something about the music. We don't actually really know much more than that, right? This data that we're given and the code book doesn't kind of explain, but in general, most of them are scored from 0 to 1, and the higher that number is, the more danceable or the louder some song is by however Spotify measures these things. Then we got tempo, duration, valence, chord, and here is a country field and then a state field if the artist is from the United States, because I want us to play and explore with maps today too. Because as I mentioned, there are multiple artists. Sometimes this is the country and state of the first artist listed. So if multiple artists recorded a song, it's the first artist. All right. So when you're looking at data, you want to ask yourself a few questions, right? You want to look, how many rows are there? Right? There were 41 rows, but really 40 rows of data because of that header. What's the unit of observation, right? How are we measuring the data? Is it 1 row per song, 1 row per artist, 1 row per album, right? In this case, it's 1 row per song, but it's possible to have data at all sorts of different levels of analysis, right? Often here at CI, we measure things at the student level of analysis, but sometimes we measure it at a class section or course level. The other thing you want to pay attention to is kind of what variables are included, and we just went through all of those, but what types of variables they are. And in general, this is very broad strokes. Take my stats class or somebody else's stats class if you want kind of a more detailed explanation. But very broad strokes, there are categorical variables and numerical variables. And so categorical variables are going to be things like eye color. Or in the case of our Spotify data, something like genre is a category, right? Tableau calls these dimensions and very kindly color codes them blue for us. So Tableau kind of helps us identify and keep track of these things, although Tableau sometimes does make mistakes. Numerical data is what it sounds like, right? It's data that's measured with numbers, and Tableau calls those measures. So things like that loudness and speechiness, the popularity score, those are all numerical values. We get back in slideshow mode. Okay. So when we're working with data, there are lots of ways to analyze the data, lots of ways, very, very complicated ways that people spend years and years studying. For the purposes of Plot-A-Thon and for the purposes of having fun with Tableau and visualizing data, we're just going to focus on descriptive statistics. And these are numbers or charts or graphs that describe, that summarize the data. We are not doing any sort of inferential statistics or statistical testing. So we'll be doing things like frequency distributions, how many songs are in each genre. Or we might do a measure of central tendency, like mean, median, mode, and figure out what is the average level of popularity of the songs. We can also look at the relationship or the correlation between two variables, right? Maybe more popular songs are more energetic, and maybe acoustic songs are less energetic and get streamed less. I don't know yet. We're going to have to explore the data, but we can look at those relationships. When you're looking at relationships between two variables, or when you're looking at correlations, it's very important to remember that correlation is not causation, right? That just because something increases when something else increases, or something decreases when something else increases, it doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other, right? Even in the example of this class, right? Hopefully there's a correlation with your Tableau knowledge and having participated in this class, but maybe you're like, I can't listen to her, I'm just gonna kind of be on my computer and do something else, and then later on you go and work on Tableau, right? So even though you participated in this class, all we can say is there's a correlation between attending and learning things about Tableau. We can't actually say that your participation caused your knowledge of Tableau to increase. Does that make sense? I mean, hopefully it does. But, and when we look at data and the relationship with data, we get spurious correlations like this. So I'm a sociologist by training, so I chose this example. The black line is the number of sociology doctorates that are awarded in the United States. And the red line is the worldwide non-commercial space launches. And I mean, this is the AI, like they are very similar in terms of their pattern over time, right? But if you know anything about sociology, you know that we have nothing to do with actual space launches. Now, we might want to do an ethnography about astronauts or something, but in terms of actual building spaceships and see, I don't even know how to describe it, right? But in terms of those things, right? And so this is a spurious correlation. So you want to be careful if two variables look like they have some sort of relationship, right? It could be for some other independent reason that's not captured in our data. All right. So we're getting to the fun stuff, the data visualizations. When we're talking about data visualizations, all we're talking about is charts, graphs, ways to visually summarize data so that we're going from a complicated spreadsheet that you look at and you're like, what? That's a whole lot of numbers and letters, but what is it telling me? To something that tells us at least part of the story about what's going on in the data. There are a lot of best practices when it comes to choosing the type of data visualization for the type of data or the type of variable that you have. But the cool thing about Tableau is it also provides kind of a lot of flexibility to customize and do things that are a little bit out of the norm in terms of data visualization. as well. So if we're doing data visualization to describe one variable, in this case, this is mostly examples of the types of things sold, like the broad categories of things sold from Tableau Superstore data, right? And these three visualizations, all three of them are actually summarizing and visualizing the exact same data, okay? So we can use Tableau to describe one variable by building some sort of bar chart. We can also build a pie chart or a donut. I prefer donut. I think they're cooler looking. It's basically a pie chart with a blank circle in the middle. But you want to be very careful with pie charts. In a lot of cases, it's hard to get a grasp of really what's going on in the data if there's too many categories and it gets too messy. Like, you've all seen a pie chart that's just like a whole bunch of slices and you're like, I can't tell what's bigger and what's smaller, okay? In this case, it works. We can very easily see that over half, in this case, 60% of sales are for office supplies. Rule of thumb though, when in doubt, just avoid a pie chart. I say that as someone that then you're going to go to the campus's IR website and you're going to see that I use donut charts all of the time. But I use donut charts very strategically to compare two categories. And so you can very clearly see what percentage of CI students are transfer students. What percentage of CI students are women? What percentage of CI students are the first in their family to go to college, right? You see that percentage very clearly when you're looking at a variable that has one or two categories. But if I had a pie chart of all of the majors at CI, right, that would look very messy and very complex. We can also do things like heat maps or tree maps to visualize data. In this case, I would argue that this is not a super effective way of visualizing this particular data, but they have their uses. And this is using different data, but this is a histogram. And you can use that to summarize and describe and visualize one variable when it's numerical, okay? In the case of a bar chart, we're summarizing and visualizing a variable that's categorical, okay? And what's the main difference besides the colors between these two charts? Right? There's spacing. So for a bar chart, there's spacing between the categories because the categories are distinct. Okay? With a histogram, the bars are touching, right? They're right next to each other because the numerical value is continuous. Does that make sense? Okay. I don't show one here, but you can also use a frequency table, and we'll play around with Tableau to do that. But that's the least fun visualization there is. You can also use Tableau or any other tool truly to visualize a relationship between two variables. And so in that case, we might do something like a line graph or a scatter plot. We could even do something like a contingency table. And contingency table is just a fancy name for a cross tabulation or a crosstab. So you might have been in a class where somebody's asked you to run a crosstab. That's what we're doing. We're looking at the relationship between two variables in tabular form. Okay. And here is just 40 of the hundreds of different ways Tableau can help you to visualize data. Again, some are more effective than others. Some are easier than others. There's a number of them that are baked right into Tableau that with a couple clicks of a button, you'll get a beautiful chart or graph. There are others that, if you do some Googling, and there's a great Tableau community. There's a group of people who call themselves Tableau Jedis, who have figured out ways to kind of bend Tableau to their will and get it to do all sorts of cool visualizations by combining different things. I'm not going to show you those today. Those are kind of really complicated and scary. But know if you ever see an example of a visualization in Tableau, some quick Googling will take you to a nice video or document that helps you do that. And pretty much anything you need to do in Tableau, Google will tell you. Again, it's a huge, huge community. There's lots of resources out there, and there's no shame in having to Google something. In fact, I Googled something just this morning to remind me of I had hidden a field and I needed to get it back, and I couldn't figure out where the get it back option was, right? And instead of sitting there and trying every option and beating my head on the table, I was like, Google, please tell me. And I found 45 links that were willing to tell me how to do it in 3 seconds, okay? And I use Tableau literally every day. But sometimes, right, you may use a feature once a year or once every semester. So don't be afraid to kind of Google, to ask questions, all of those good things. Okay, so let's get started in Tableau. Hopefully you have Tableau downloaded and your Spotify data set downloaded. And we're going to switch over to working right in Tableau.
Slash T dash A dash
All right, so when you open Tableau, if you're opening it for the first time, it's gonna look something like this, which sometimes scares people because it's like, what, how, it says nothing. Yeah. That's totally okay. Once you start using Tableau regularly to build visualizations, the whole blank space will start to fill with those visualizations that you see. But currently, we have Tableau open, but no data in Tableau to do anything with. The beautiful thing about Tableau is it can basically sit on top of any sort of data set or database and pull the data from that you need. In this case, we're using a simple Excel file, but a lot of times I pull data directly from SQL Server or something like that. So you're going to go in this blue bar for connecting. And underneath where it says to a file, you're going to click Microsoft Excel, because that's where our Spotify data lives. And then you're going to navigate to wherever you have that Spotify data set saved. And then you're going to open it. And when we do that, Tableau automatically takes us to this data source page. So don't let that little kind of highlighting of sheet 1 fool you. You're on what's called the data source page to start. And you can see that not only does it tell you what data set you're connected to, it tells you if there's multiple sheets, what sheet you're using. And then from there, you get summaries of the data. This kind of big set of data over here, which you can scroll through, is basically a copy of that Excel spreadsheet, but in kind of Tableau's form. And you can start to see that Tableau's already categorizing the data. So song name has a little ABC and it's blue because that's a categorical string variable. Number of strings has the number mark and or hashtag, and it's green to kind of signal to us that it's a numerical value. So we can look at the entire data set in this pane, and you can move things around to kind of make things the size that you need for whatever you're doing. In this pane over here, it's just a summary of the data. Again, it tells you that type of data. So in addition to number signs and ABCs, we see this is a little calendar because it's telling us that this date field is actually a true date field and it's reading it as such. Or down here for state and country, you see a little globe. So it's telling us that Tableau is reading those fields and actually recognizes them as some sort of geographical location. And it can do the same with latitude and longitude, with zip code, with all sorts of interesting geographic data. Okay, so remember I told you that most of the data cleaning you're going to want to do in Excel. Because this free version of Tableau doesn't have a ton of features when it comes to data cleaning. But one nice feature that it has is it allows you to split up fields if it doesn't make sense for them to be together. So in this case, right, we have artists, and sometimes it's just a single artist like Billie Eilish. Sometimes it's a combination of artists, so Bad Bunny and someone else. Sometimes it's a whole host, right? There's probably like 4 or 5 artists here. And if I made this wider, we could see all of them. Okay. So remember one of the things I told you was that for the country and state fields, it was just attached to the first artist that's listed. So I want to figure out a way to isolate that first artist from the list in this original artist field. And in order to do that, I'm going to go over here and click on and highlight my artist field. And then click on the little caret. And it gives me a number of options. But the option that I want to choose is custom split, right? I'm going to tell Tableau how I want to split up that artist field. And so how should this data be split? It asks you the questions and leads you through the steps. You don't kind of have to remember complex code like you would in SQL or Python or R or Stata. So in this case, we know that those artists are split with a comma. So I'm going to put a comma in that little box. And then do I just want the first name split? Do I want the last name split off? Or do I want all of them? Now, truly, I'm only interested in the first, so I could choose first. But I'm also a massive data nerd, and I like to have as much data as possible. So maybe in the future, I want to know all of the artists. And so I'm going to choose all. And if you scroll over, you can notice the original artist field is still the same. Tableau doesn't change those original fields, but it creates new fields for us. And so we get in artist split 1, this is the first artist listed. And so every song is going to have at least that first artist. And again, that's what's attached to this country and state data. And if there are additional artists, right, they get their own column as well. Yes.
So if the comma was kind of the identifier, is there something that Spotify also dictates where it understands, because Tableau understands that this isn't a whole name, right? Billie Eilish versus wanting to split Billie and Eilish, because it didn't do that. But did Spotify code something when it came in?
So Spotify, when the data came in, Spotify separated artist names with commas. Sometimes it will be, there'll be like quotation marks and then commas or brackets. It could be anything. And sometimes it is a space. But you're right, in the case of artist names, sometimes they're single artists, right, has multiple names. And so we don't want to split like Billie Eilish by first and last. And so when we chose that custom split option, right, we told it that the way the field was separated was with a comma. If we told it that it was separated with a space, it would then split the names on every single space. So you get one that says, one column that says Billy, one that says Eilish, one that says Bad, one that says Bunny, and so on, right? That doesn't make sense. But say this was something like, I had a list of all of your names, and it was first and last name, and I wanted to split them, so I had one column of your first names and one column of your last name. In that case, that makes sense. And so in that case, I would just tell it that I need to use the separator of a space instead of a comma. And it could be a slash, it could be whatever's separating those data pieces. And it could be multiple things. So if it's a slash and then a space or something, you just tell Tableau in this little box that that's what it is.
But if I'd had a comma, like if I'd had Eilish, like comma Billy, it would have separated.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So you want to kind of pay attention to how the data is formatted. And again, that's where some of the more complex data cleaning, it makes sense to do it in Excel rather than Tableau Public, because Tableau Public just doesn't have the data cleaning features that the thousands and thousands of dollars version does. All right, does anyone have any questions about this data space page? Is everyone kind of with me and has been able to follow along? Yes.
You were saying something about the artist because the country.
Yes.
You're still getting the first name of the artist, the country from the first artist, right?
Yes. Yeah, and so the country and state are fields that didn't come from Spotify. They came from my Wikipedia searches earlier today. Because I wanted to be able to show you how to do maps, and you need countries, or you need some sort of geographical data to do maps. So if something's wrong here, blame Wikipedia. And if you were in my class, I would tell you not to cite Wikipedia, but this is just for fun. But I only looked up the first artist that was listed. I didn't look up every single artist and where every single artist was from. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So once you have your data source set up, you can always come back and review, make changes, etc. But for the most part, when you're building data visualizations, you're going to use one of these options next to the data source down at the bottom. So there's three different kind of ways to build visualizations and combine visualizations in Tableau. The first way and the kind of basic building block is a sheet. It already starts with sheet one open for you, but if you click on this next little box, you can open as many worksheets or sheets as you need. Each sheet contains one data visualization. And then this next little button, right, that's kind of a box that's split in fours. This is a dashboard page. And a dashboard page is where you're going to combine the data visualizations together, add a title, add links, add whatever else you need to that data visualization. This last button is a story. And to be honest, I'm not clear why Tableau still has this story feature. I don't know anyone that still uses them, except for like the Chancellor's Office still has some old dashboards that they haven't updated in years. And so they're still using stories. But stories are one way to kind of combine dashboard pages to tell a story. The thing is that when you publish Tableau dashboards, you can publish them with tabs or with buttons at the top that allow you to customize how people move through your dashboard pages. And so there's really no use for stories, especially because, let me show you. When you set up a story, it builds all of these big boxes at the top and you have no control over the size or how people see them or other things. So my recommendation is to just ignore the existence of stories and use dashboards to tell your data story. All right. So we're looking at sheet 1. And you'll notice that whatever the sheet in the tab is called down below, it all will be reflected up here in the title, in the kind of main portion of the worksheet. So if I change this to, say, genres, it's going to automatically change this to say genres. Okay. So you can change the names of these tabs, and I highly recommend it. You don't want to be in the situation where you have sheets 1 through 60, and you're like, which one of those is that one bar graph, right? Name them. The other thing you can do is you can right-click on them, and you can color code them. Okay? I use that color coding feature a lot because I have visualizations that a group of them go on one dashboard page, another group of them go on another dashboard page, and so I color code them so I can see all the blue ones are on page 1, all the green are on page 2, and so on. Okay. Some other things you need to know about kind of Tableau and its features. The actual data fields are listed here in this left-hand column. And the dimensions, right, those categorical fields are always going to be at the top. The numerical fields, those measures, are always going to be at the bottom. Okay. You can search, so if you have a data set that has 100 fields, you can search for the field that you need, as opposed to scrolling through. That's a very nice feature. Next to that are these, what we call cards. And there's a pages card, a filters card, and a marks card. The marks card is kind of how you tell Tableau how you want to customize your visualization. So you can customize the colors that are used, the size of the bars or circles or whatever it is that you're using. You can customize the text and labels. Details works in a variety of ways, and we'll get to that. And then tooltip is this really cool thing that in your actual visualization, when you mouse over it, a pop-up will happen just like this, but that will describe your data in whatever ways you've customized it to be described. Okay? And in any of these marks cards, you can just drag a field over and it will do something. This obviously isn't useful, but I want you to get used to in Tableau, you can literally just drag and drop things around to get to what you want. Filters is another place that you can just drag things around. So I'm going to go back to genre. If I drag genre to filters, I get a list of all the genres from our data set. Well, maybe I'm only interested in pop music. And so I can limit what gets displayed to just pop music. I could also set this up so that the user has control over that and they're able to filter down the line once it's published. So filters and marks are really useful. Pages is an advanced feature that we'll have workshop version 2.0 for that. One of the most important spaces, though, is going to be your column and rows bar. This is where you're going to drag the fields to start your visualizations. So since I named this sheet genres, and I've already started playing around with the genres data a little bit, let's start exploring it. So I'm going to click on and drag that genres field over to rows. Notice all the different things that are now outlined in orange, right? That's Tableau telling us you can drop this in any of these places. I want to drop it in rows. Okay, so now I get a table that lists each of the genres for these 40 songs. But I mean, that's not really telling me much, right? I want to know what's going on with this data. How many of the songs are pop? How many are rap? How many of them are hip hop? And so on. So I'm going to use our ID field. Remember, this is the field that doesn't have a duplicated ID. So it's going to truly count all 40 songs. And so I drag that ID field to text. And now I get this mess, right? Hold on, wait for it. So ID is literally, these are the ID numbers of each of the songs, right? So there's one funk song with the ID number 1097. Okay? That doesn't tell me anything. What I want to do is count how many ID numbers are in each of these rows. And so to do that, I click on the little caret on my ID button or pill. Tableau likes to call these kind of blue, and you'll see some green in fields. They call them pills. And you get a whole host of options, but the one that I'm interested in is measure. Because I want to count the number of IDs. In this case, I know they're distinct, so count and count distinct are going to give me the same count. But in general, I try to err on the side of the most conservative option, which in this case is count distinct. So now we have a table that tells us there's 2 EDM songs, 1 funk song. It looks like Latin and pop music is the most represented in this data set of 40 songs. And we have our first frequency table. This is technically a data visualization. Is it super exciting? It's not super exciting, but we can make it more exciting. Okay, over here in the right-hand side of your window, you should have a little show me option. And if it's not open, click on it and it'll open. And this tells you all the different types of visualizations you can build with the data that you have. So the ones that are kind of fully colored are visualizations that work with the data that you've put in. So for example, we can have a frequency, or what Tableau calls a text table. And it tells us for a text table, you need 1 or more dimensions and 1 or more measures. And we have that. Our genre is our 1 dimension. And the count of our ID, even though that originally was a categorical field because we're counting it, now it's a measure. It's a frequency. And so I can continue to scroll and figure out, you know, can I build a map with genre? No, right? And so it's kind of grayed out. And if I look down below, it says for symbol maps, I need at least 1 geolocation field. And I don't have that here. But I can do things like build a bar chart. Right? And you just click on that. And very quickly, you get a bar chart. Now, you've got a visualization, but the fun thing about Tableau data visualization, and especially Plot-A-Thon, is figuring out ways to visualize the data that's both appealing and easy to understand. And so what sort of things might make this bar chart a little more appealing or easier to kind of understand?
More colors.
More colors, okay. So, you want bubbles? We'll talk about bubbles in a second. So, I want to color code these bars. So I'm gonna go back to genre and I'm gonna drag it over to color. And now all of a sudden I have a legend and these bars are color coded. I don't really like these color options, so I can click on that color marks and go to edit colors. And Tableau gives me a whole bunch of different options of things to choose. Maybe I'm gonna choose Jewel Bright instead. And I can all of a sudden then assign EDM this kind of periwinkle color instead. I don't know. But you can customize it in a variety of ways. You can even customize it down to a hex code. So for something like CI's dashboard, for Channel Islands, we have a very specific red. If you're interested, this is how often I use it. It is CB132A. And so when I'm making bar charts and data visualizations for CI, I make sure to use that specific red. So you can color code this. What else might make this a little easier to understand besides color coding?
You sort it that way.
If you sort it, yes. And of course, Zoom is not wanting me to be able to see that often. But here in this toolbar, there are a few options. One, you can sort in descending order. The other, you can sort in ascending order, but very kindly Tableau shows you the visualization so you get a sense of descending means the biggest is going to be on the top. Okay? So if I click that, now all of a sudden I can clearly see kind of the bigger categories down to the smaller categories in terms of genre. I could also, instead of having a bar chart go horizontally, I could have a bar chart go vertically. And that's next to these sorting options, this little swap rows and columns. It's just going to flip where genre and the count of the ID are, so that now all of a sudden I have a vertical bar chart instead. Tableau always defaults to your visualization fitting what it calls a standard size. I don't know what that is because it varies dramatically between data and visualization types. But in general, when I'm working on a worksheet, I like to set it to the entire view so that it fills that entire window. You can resize it later, but it's easiest to start with it filling that entire view instead of being like a tiny number up in the corner or something like that. All right, what else might make this bar chart a little easier to understand?
I feel like numbers on the top of this.
All right, so we want some labels to know what's going on. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna take our count ID. Remember, that's the field that's counting how many of each genre there are. And so I'm gonna go back over here to ID. And this time I'm gonna drag it to label. And again, it's putting the actual numbers on, but if we change it to count distinct, I'm gonna get a count right at the top. The cool thing about Tableau is all of these things can be customized within that. So I personally think that those numbers are really kind of tiny and I'd like to see them a lot bigger. So I can make them size 16. Maybe I make them bold. Maybe I show you the hex code for CI. I wouldn't actually choose this because it's not color coordinating. Oops, I made a wrong error. See. This is not visually appealing to have red numbers on there, but I just want to kind of give you a sense of how customized things can get. The nice thing about Tableau is when you're building data visualizations, and particularly with something like Plot-A-Thon, where your end goal is an infographic, sometimes you bend the rules a little bit about how you visualize data, right? In a stats class, for example, I would say that it's very important to have your x-axis and y-axis labeled, right? Have a title at the top, all the things to kind of make it a professional, publishable in terms of a research project graph. But sometimes those things are not as kind of fun and visually appealing for something like an infographic. And so I can actually do things like right click on the y-axis, and here where it says show header, if I click that, it takes away that header because it wasn't really contributing anything because the labels are telling me what the frequencies are. Down here, the genre labels are really tiny. And especially compared to this number size, I could certainly go in by right-clicking and going to format. I get a whole bunch of formatting options for those fields. But I'm going to show you what I consider an even cooler, better option, which is to take my genre field, drag it over to label. And so now I have the number, that frequency count, and the genre in my label. But I'm still like, now it kind of looks messy. So maybe I want to do something first. I'm going to get rid of the red because I can't look at that ugliness anymore. But I can do things like change its alignment. So let's say I want to move the labels to the bottom of the bars. I can do that here. I can change the direction, right? A whole bunch of ways to customize how it's displayed to kind of make it a little more fun, make it more visual appeal when you're telling that story with an infographic. And now that I have that genre label there, I can uncheck that show header option and remove it. Okay. You can even get really fancy and remove these like axis and grid lines. You can do all sorts of things, but that's a bunch of customization options for the bar chart. Now someone asked for bubbles. Right, so down here in the bottom right-hand corner, there is a bubbles option, and we have one or more dimensions and one or two measures, so we can have bubbles. We have to, sometimes when you make those changes, you lose your labels, and so you have to remind Tableau that you want those labels back. So you'll notice that genre stayed in that label field, so we're seeing genre, but that ID count moved from the label to the size because the count is telling Tableau how big to make the bubble. Okay. And then of course you can play around with the colors, but I definitely want the count on the bubbles, not just the size. Because as fun as bubbles are, right, they're not quite as good at telling us, right? I can't tell just by looking at it that that green circle is 12, but the yellow circle is 11, right? I can't tell that. I can hover over and my tooltip will tell me. But I can also go over here. So where I have count ID, and it's in size, if I push Control and then click on it, I can drag it to label and it'll duplicate. So I want to show you that one more time. So if I just dragged it to label, it leaves the size field, and now all of a sudden it's labels, but it's so tiny you can't see them. you need to hit control, and when you hit control, it'll duplicate whatever field you're interested in. Okay. I could have also, from my left-hand variable list, I could have also dragged it over that way too. So you have lots of ways. I chose to use the control duplicate option because it was already set up as count ID. And if I just dragged ID over, I would have had to tell it to count it again. This is an okay example of bubble charts because there's a decent amount of size variation. One of the things that a lot of Tableau users actually use for bubble charts is once you move bubble charts into a dashboard, and really any chart, you can then set it up to filter within. So if I had bubble charts in a dashboard and I set it up to filter, if I clicked on pop, it would change all my other visualizations to only show me the pop songs, right? And so it's not necessarily great for telling us the actual kind of numbers, the size of the distribution, but it's a nice tool for other things. The same with a tree map, which is basically boxes instead of bubbles. Okay. One other thing that I want to show you here, and I'm actually gonna go back because I want to go back to my semi-pretty bar chart. Is currently I'm displaying the frequency, but maybe I want to know what percentage instead of how many, right? I want to know of these 40 songs, what percentage are pop. Well, I can do 12 divided by 40, but I can also tell Tableau to do 12 divided by 40 for me. So I'm going to drag the ID field from over here. Don't use the green ID field in your marks card because you're going to drag it to label again, okay? And you can't do the control duplicate within the same little mark, like you can't do it. I couldn't have done control count ID into label. It would be like, I'm already there. But it doesn't know that we want to eventually use this ID as count ID. So I'm going to tell it to count, just like we've done before. But here's the fun part. If I click on that little down caret again and go to quick table calculation, I can ask Tableau to tell me the percent of the total. Okay. And then maybe I want to do some customization. So I don't love having multiple decimal points in a percentage. So I can click on format and go to numbers and tell it I only want 1, or I want 0, or I want 5, right? Whatever you want. But again, you want to choose something that is visually appealing and visually useful. I can also then go in and customize the way the labels are showing up on those bars. So maybe I want it to say genre first. So I'm just copying and pasting to move genre to the top. And then maybe I want it to say the percentage after the genre. And then I want to put the count in parentheses next to the percentage. And maybe I even want to signal that that count is a count by using the symbol in and equals. And you can add all sorts of things. So see all of these fields that are grayed out and have the carets on the side, those are the actual fields that Tableau will automatically display, right? We drug genre over there so it knows to display genre. But you can type anything you want into this label and it'll include that in the label. Right? Cool. Again, not useful, but fun. That particular comment. So you have all sorts of customization that you can do here. Okay. So that's a bar chart or some other options like bubbles where we're describing one categorical variable. Let's open up another sheet by clicking on the new worksheet button. And let's play around with describing one new numerical variable. So I don't know about you, but I'm interested in this popularity measure. Like what's going on there? What do we know about the popularity of songs? So I'm going to choose this as the numerical value that at least we're going to get started and play with. So I have two options here, and I'm going to show you both. The first is I could drag it to my rows or columns, and it'll automatically start building a histogram for that numerical field. I can also drag it to the text, and it will display the actual number of the calculation. And I know that's really tiny, so I'm going to fix that by right-clicking on it and going to Format. And then changing that size. And even that looks super tiny. Let's make this giant. Okay. So now that we can see it, I'm reminded that we haven't done some important things. One is renaming our sheet. And just like with the labels, where the field shows up in the title, if you double click popularity, it'll open up this edit title option. It automatically populates with the sheet name, but you can remove that from it if you want. You can customize it. You can add any text or anything else that you want there as well. So maybe I want it to say sheet name so popularity of Spotify songs, January to June 2020. That's way too long of a title to use in the actual tab down below, but I can make that customization above. Okay. Now, numbers like this, first of all, we got to figure out what on earth is this 2,857. Does anyone know what this is relative to that popularity field? I heard somebody, I think someone said some who said some. All right, we all know it's that is the correct answer. So excellent. And we know that because it actually tells us here, right? It says some and then in parentheses, popularity. So what it's done is it's taken the popularity scores and it's summed them. It's added them up for every single song. Is that a useful number? Does it tell us anything? No. But Tableau can tell us some useful things if we ask it to. So as always, I'm clicking on the caret to open up my menu. And here I'm going to go down to measure. It tells me that sum is already selected. But I'm going to switch that over to average. So now I know the average or the mean popularities of all 40 songs. Now, in general, some sort of bar graph or some visualization is going to be more appealing, but I also want to encourage you to think about using big numbers, what we sometimes call call-out numbers, or I'm trying to think of how to say this, big A-word numbers, or bands. To highlight something really important, okay? So for example, at Channel Islands, one of the most important numbers for administrators and other people to know is what's the number of students enrolled each semester. So I have a dashboard that tells us in a huge number exactly how many students are enrolled each semester. And just like the other things, I can color code it, I make it the CI red, I make it bold, all of those things. In infographics and other visualizations, a band, a big you know what number, I would say this normally, but you're people I don't know. And so that big number, that call out number is a nice signal, but it also is nice to use in conjunction with something else. So we maybe want to keep this. We maybe want to know the average popularity. And in fact, I'm going to go back in and customize this to say average popularity of Spotify songs. Okay. I want to keep this number because maybe I'm going to use it in something in the future. So instead of continuing to make changes on this sheet, I'm going to right-click on the popularity tab at the bottom and scroll up to the duplicate option. And I want to duplicate the sheet. So now you should have popularity and popularity 2. Okay. So instead of just having this giant number of the overall average of all 40 songs, maybe I want to know how that popularity is distributed across genres, right? Are K-pop songs more popular than funk songs on average? And so I, as always, can click on my genre field and I can drag it over to my columns or my rows. Have no fear, right? We're going to get back to nice visualizations. All you need to do is click on that bar chart and it's going to take you from those giant numbers to our kind of default blue bar chart. Again, I can do things like make it the entire view, make it vertical instead of horizontal. Most importantly, I can add a label. So I'm going to use that control click here, trick. So I'm going to hit control and then I'm going to drag average popularity to the label. And now all of a sudden those average popularity scores are showing up on my labels. Having them giant was really nice when we wanted a big call out number, but I'm going to make it something more reasonable. Thanks. And again, just like we did before, you have all the color coding, labeling, customization options that you may want. So far we've looked at how to visualize one categorical variable, how to visualize one numerical variable, how to visualize one numerical variable across the categorical variable. That's what we're doing here. We're looking at the numerical variable of popularity across the categorical field of genre. But sometimes we want to be able to compare two numerical values. And so to do that, I'm going to open up a new sheet. And because I'm interested in two numerical values, I know that I want to focus on my measures, the green fields in the bottom half. Popularity is something that we can maybe stick with. So we can drag that over. And then maybe we want to also drag over danceability. We want to find out, are songs that are more danceable more popular? It seems like a reasonable hypothesis, but I don't know. Okay. So far, right, what it's telling us is the sum of the popularity score relative to the sum of the danceability score. That's useless, okay? But we can do something like pull in. So down here in measures, there's always going to be this field, and notice that it's in italics, and the kind of four below it are in italics. That's kind of your signal that these are fields that Tableau has generated that are not standard or didn't come with the data set as you brought it into Tableau. The count field is going to do a very similar thing that the ID field did. It's gonna let us count things. And so I'm gonna drag the count over to details. Just kidding, not details. Nope. Oh, I know exactly what I did, sorry. Undo, erase that from your brains. Instead of doing a sum here, I think we just want to do, no. My apologies, I did this morning and it worked perfectly. Let me play around until we get to where I want. No? Okay. Let's reset. Let's do something like the number of times charted and how that maps on. Oh, I know what I did actually. No, now I really apologies. We're in the final minutes and I've lost it. I'm gonna throw some fields back in so that we can see this numerical relationship. It's telling me I have a scatter plot, but again, it's looking at a sum versus a sum, which is not very useful. And so I'm gonna change this to, I could have sworn it's count, but it's clearly not. Let's try, oh, I know. Here we go, sorry, losing my mind. You want to use that actual ID field. In this case, I put song ID, but the regular ID field will work as well. And you just move it over to the label. And so now instead of, again, I have that note, I tried it, it didn't work the first time. Sometimes you just have to try and try again. When you move it over, now instead of having a sum versus a sum overall for all 40 songs, now we have a plot point, a circle for each individual song and the way in which their numbers of streams and acousticness intersects. Again, it looks like in this case, all of these songs, regardless of their level of popular or acousticness, have a huge number of streams. So maybe this isn't the relationship that we're interested in. Maybe there's something about popularity by acousticness. And so you can continue to kind of trade out these fields just by dragging and dropping one over the other to explore what's the relationship between acousticness and all these other measures within the song, okay? This is rushing a little bit through the scatter plot point. One thing I would really recommend doing though is actually removing the label in this case, because the ID is just kind of confusing and not telling us much. So now we just have a true scatter plot. But I want to use these last few minutes to get to the promised map. Because this is one of the coolest things that Tableau does so easily relative to a lot of other mapping options. And so I've started a new sheet. And this time, I'm going to drag country over to rows. It's not exciting yet. It's just starting me off with that kind of normal text table. Again, I want it to have a count. So I'm going to drop ID and do count distinct. And so now I get a count of artists by country. So there were 18 artists from the United States, 1 from Spain, and so on. But again, table's not super exciting. I want a map. So I'm going to click on my map options. This first map is a symbol map, and it's going to take a second. And when it's a symbol, it's just going to give you a shape. It defaults to the circle, and the size of the circle is supposed to signal the frequency. So the United States has a larger circle because in this sample of data, more artists came from the United States than other countries. I like the kind of filled in map option a little better. It's just a lot more visually appealing. In this case, it's color coded so that the lighter colors have fewer artists from that country and the darker colors, again, in this case, the United States. And the cool thing is that when you hover over, right, not only does it tell you what country, but it highlights the entire part of the country so that you can, for example, realize and remember that that Alaska is part of the United States, even though it's up there. And it's really tiny, but over here, those little tiny Hawaiian islands as well. And so you get that same sort of option for all of the countries. And you can do a very similar setup for states and do maps of states as well. And again, down to things like zip code or city. So for example, at CI, we have a dashboard that has a map that shows us the city and county that CI students came from. So we can see, for example, that more students actually come from LA County than Ventura County, things like that. Cool. Okay. And then in our very last few minutes, I want to show you how to build an actual dashboard and put this together. So instead of opening a new sheet, I'm going to open a new dashboard. And now I have a list of all of my sheets over here. And now I can drag them in different ways to populate my dashboard. I can make this dashboard bigger. I don't know why it's such a tiny dashboard, but you can play around with its size. You can move these things and customize the size of these things in all sorts of ways. So like I said, remember for something like the genres, it was nice to have it on the full screen on the sheet. I can then in my dashboard resize it in a way that makes sense. In this objects box at the bottom, I can add in all sorts of other things like text. So maybe at the top, I want to add in a title for this dashboard page. I'm going to call it Kristin's dashboard. You should call it something more useful, but we're just playing around. And again, just like always, we can customize the size, the formatting, etc., and resize. And there's a whole host of other options there. But hopefully this is enough to get you started in playing around with some visualizations in Tableau. Remember, Google is your friend when it comes to Tableau. And so anything that you're trying to figure out, the Tableau community will have some sort of answer. And if you get really stuck, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll help you problem solve that. Any questions or anything? All right, well, thank you for your time. I hope you're excited about Plot-A-Thon and excited about Tableau. And if you have a minute, please scan this QR code or use the link in your in the slides that you have access to take you to a survey. This is a kind of general writing and multi-literacy center survey. So you're gonna have to kind of find the answer choices that fit a Tableau and Plot-A-Thon workshop. But let us know how things worked, what could be more useful in the future, and so on. So thank you for your time. Hope you all had a good lunch. Thank you.
Is the recording going to be on the Spotify?
Hey, can I make a little announcement?
Oh, yes. Anne wants to make an announcement. Oh, yes. 1 second. Go for it.
For anybody that has a minute, if you're leaving the library right now, our sponsor, the Trade Desk, is right outside of the library. I really encourage you all just to stop by and say hi and that you read a Plot-A-Thon workshop. I think it would be really encouraging for them.
Yeah.
But, that's all.
Thanks, Anne. Trade Desk. So, Trade Desk actually does some really cool things with data visualization and has in the kind of past few years sponsored Plot-A-Thon and has started providing other sorts of grants and things at CI. So Trade Desk is down below. They probably have free swag because most of those tables have free swag. So stop by, like Dan said, and let them know that you are at a Plot-A-Thon shop and see what cool stuff they have to offer you.
Plus, the winners of Plot-A-Thon get a mentorship opportunity with the Trade Desk.
Yes. Thanks, Koa.